A few words from Alfred Hitchcock. When I first met the trio of lads who called themselves the Three Investigators, I foolishly promised to introduce their most interesting cases. Little did I realize how prolific the lads would be. As you will see, I did my best to avoid introducing this case, but the boys foiled me, so I will do my duty and proceed with yet another introduction to the Three Investigators. The members of this intrepid junior detective firm are Jupiter Jones, Pete Crenshaw, and Bob Andrews. All three reside in the town of Rocky Beach, California, a few miles from Hollywood. Jupiter is the brains of the firm. Pete provides the brawn, and Bob, the most studious of the three, is in charge of research. Together, the three lads are a formidable team. They have outwitted the cleverest of crooks and survived the most terrifying situations. In their newest case, they are asked to track down the missing possessions of a dead artist. A simple enough assignment, but one that leads them into strange byways of mystery and intrigue. Now you know enough to begin reading the story, if you dare. Alfred Hitchcock. A Figure in Black. The name of this book is The Mystery of the Shrinking House. The first chapter is A Figure in Black. "Uncle Titus!" Jupiter Jones cried. "Look over there!" The truck from the Jones salvage yard had just stopped in the driveway of the old house in Remuda Canyon on the outskirts of Rocky Beach. Jupiter and his friend Pete Crenshaw were sitting in the truck cab with Uncle Titus Jones. "What?" Uncle Titus said, startled. "Look where, Jupiter?" "There, on the side of the house." Jupiter pointed into the twilight. A black shape seemed to hang halfway up the side of the big old frame house in the canyon. "I don't see a thing, Jupiter Jones," Uncle Titus said. "Gosh," Pete said, "neither do I, Jupe." Jupiter stared. The figure in black was gone. 1 minute it had been on the side of the house, then it had disappeared into thin air. Or had it been there at all? "I'm sure I saw someone," Jupiter said. "Someone all in black on the side of the house." Uncle Titus looked dubiously at the big frame house. The canyon walls cast strange, eerie shadows on the isolated house and the small cottage near it. All seemed quiet and peaceful. "You probably saw a shadow, Jupe," said Uncle Titus. "Canyon shadows sure play funny tricks," Pete agreed. "No," Jupiter insisted. "I saw someone all in black, and I think he went into the house through a window." Uncle Titus hesitated. He knew that his stocky nephew had a great deal of imagination, and he hated to raise a false alarm, but he also knew that Jupiter was usually right. "All right, come on then," Uncle Titus said. "We'd better tell Professor Carswell what you saw." The two boys followed Uncle Titus up an overgrown walk to the front door of the big house. It was an old house from the last century, with wooden towers, many peaks and gables, columns holding up the front porch, and a massive front door. The man who answered their knocking was tall and thin, with very deep-shadowed eyes. He wore a rumpled tweed jacket even in July, and carried a thick book in some foreign language. "Professor Carswell?" Uncle Titus asked. The professor smiled. "You must be Mr. Jones from the salvage yard. Come in. What I have to sell." Uncle Titus interrupted. "I don't mean to alarm you, Professor, but my nephew here insists that he saw a figure all in black climbing up the side of your house a moment ago." "Someone climbing up this house?" The professor blinked at the boys and Uncle Titus. "You must be mistaken." "No, sir," Jupiter said urgently. "I'm certain of what I saw. Do you have anything valuable a burglar would want?" "I'm afraid not, young man." absolutely nothing, Professor Carswell said. Still, if you say you saw something, I'm sure you did, only I can't imagine. Of course, you must have seen my son up to one of his games. He has a black cowboy outfit, and try as I may, I can't seem to convince Hal that doors are better entrances than windows. Professor Carswell smiled again, and Uncle Titus nodded. Of course, that's it. I know how boys are. Yes, sir, the owner of the salvage yard said. How old is your son? Jupiter asked. A little younger than you, I guess, but taller. As tall as your friend there, the professor nodded to Pete. The person I saw was much bigger, Jupiter said firmly. Ah, the Professor Carswell looked skeptically at Jupiter. Very well, young man. We'll see if your burglar is in the house. The professor led them through the downstairs rooms of the big old house. Many of the rooms were empty and closed off. A professor of languages can't really afford a house like this these days, the professor said sadly. My ancestors were wealthy ship captains who brought goods here from the East. They built this house. Now only myself and my son remain. A cousin left the place to us a year ago. We closed off most of the rooms in this house and rented out the old caretaker's cottage to make ends meet. They found nothing in the downstairs rooms and went upstairs. Most of the rooms upstairs were also empty, and they saw no sign of an intruder. Jupiter studied all the rooms. There's not much to steal, he admitted. You sound disappointed, said the professor. Jupe likes mysteries, Pete said. Only there isn't any burglar around here. Professor Carson's son isn't in the house either, Jupiter pointed out thoughtfully. I know, I saw someone. You called Uncle Titus to sell some items to the salvage yard. Is there something valuable among them? I wish there were, Professor Carswell said, but they're only what poor old Mr. Cameron had when he died a month ago in our cottage. The contents of 2 suitcases and some of his amateur paintings. Old Cameron was something of a recluse. He owned little and couldn't even pay his rent the last few months. I hope to recover a few dollars by selling his meager possessions to your uncle. Recluses sometimes have hidden valuables, Jupiter said. Professor Carswell smiled. You sound like a detective. We are detectives, Pete blurted out. Show him, Jupe. Jupiter produced a business card on which was printed, The 3 Investigators. We investigate anything. First investigator, Jupiter Jones. Second investigator, Peter Crenshaw. Records and research, Bob Andrews. Well, very impressive, Professor Carswell said. I'm quite sorry. There is nothing here to investigate, boys. It must have been the canyon shadows you saw. The professor had hardly stopped speaking when he heard a cry. Help! Help! They all froze. Professor Carswell listened and suddenly turned pale. Help! The cry came from outside. Dad! That's my son Hal! Professor Carswell exclaimed. Come on! The professor ran down the stairs and out the door with the boys and Uncle Titus right behind him. In the canyon twilight, the cry came again from the small cottage off to their left. Help! That's the end of the chapter.